Good morning. Today we are continuing our History of Jazz Music lectures with the blues. What are the blues? The blues are a secular folk music created by African Americans in the early 20th century, originally in the South. The simple but expressive forms of the blues became, by the 1960s, one of the most important influences on the development of popular music throughout the United States. Although instrumental accompaniment is almost universal in the blues is essentially a vocal form. Blues songs are lyrical rather than narrative. Blues singers are expressing feelings rather than telling stories. The emotion expressed is generally one of sadness or melancholy, often due to problems in love. To express this musically, blues performers use vocal techniques such as melisma, sustaining a single syllable across several pitches, rhythmic techniques such as syncopation, and instrumental techniques such as choking or bending guitar strings on the neck, or applying a metal slide or bottleneck to the guitar strings to create a whining voice-like sound. As a musical style, the blues is characterized by expressive microtonal pitch inflections, blues notes, a 3-line textual stanza of the form AAB, and a 12-measure form. Typically, the first 2.5 measures of each line are devoted to singing, the last measure and a half consisting of an instrumental break that repeats, answers, or complements the vocal line. In terms of functional, i.e. traditional European harmony, the simplest blues harmonic progression is described as follows. 1, 4, and 5 refer respectively to the first or tonic, fourth or subdominant, and fifth or dominant notes of the scale. So over here we can see our blues form. So we have a tonic chord, tonic, tonic, subdominant, subdominant, tonic, tonic, dominant, subdominant, tonic, and dominant. Or it'll look like this: C major, C major, C major, C major, F major, F major, C major, C major, G major, F major, C major, C major. The evolution of blues. The blues had deep roots in American history, particularly African American history. The blues originated on southern plantations in the 19th century. Its inventors were slaves, ex-slaves, and the descendants of slaves, African American sharecroppers who sang as they toiled in the cotton and vegetable fields. It's generally accepted that the music evolved from African spirituals, African chants, work songs, field hollers, rural fife and drum music, revivalist hymns, and country dance music. The blues grew up in the Mississippi Delta, just upriver from New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz. Blues and jazz have always influenced each other, and they still interact in countless ways today. Unlike jazz, the blues didn't spread out significantly from the South to the Midwest until the 1930s and 1940s. Once the Delta blues made their way up the Mississippi to urban areas, the music evolved into electrified Chicago blues, other regional blues styles, and various jazz blues hybrids. A decade or so later, the blues gave birth to rhythm and blues and rock and roll. No single person invented the blues, but many people claim to have discovered the genre. For instance, minstrel show band leader W.C. Handy insisted that the blues were revealed to him in 1903 by an itinerant street guitarist at a train station in Tutwiler, Mississippi. During the middle to late 1800s, the Deep South was home to hundreds of seminal bluesmen who helped to shape the music. Unfortunately, much of this original music follows these sharecroppers to their graves. But the legacy of these earliest blues pioneers can still be heard in 1920s and 1930s recordings from Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Georgia, and other southern states. This music is not very far removed from the field hollers and work songs of the slaves and sharecroppers. Any of the earliest blues musicians incorporated the blues into a wider repertoire that included traditional folk songs, vaudeville music, and minstrel tunes. When the country blues moved to the cities and other locales, it took on various regional characteristics. hence the St. Louis Blues, the Memphis Blues, the Louisiana Blues, etc. So let's take a look at some famous blues artists. So first up we have Ma Rainey. She was known as the mother of the blues. She's the earliest well-known blues singer and the first generation of blues singers to record. She has powerful vocal abilities, and today's example of her singing is Boll Weevil Blues. So our next example is W.C. Handy. He's known as the father of the blues. He was born in Alabama. He writes instrumental blues songs. He's very influential as a songwriter. And here is an example of his music, the St. Louis Blues. So this one actually sounds to me like it was more influenced by early marching bands. You can definitely hear some marching band aspects to this music. Tomorrow we're going to be studying Dixieland, which was influenced by early marching band, and I think a lot of these artists actually did multiple genres of jazz because these genres were all happening at the same time. So blues was earlier than Dixieland, but a bunch of the artists are overlapping. So that sounded like it was definitely a blues song. It also had some influence from Dixieland. Our last artist is called Sunnyland Slim, and he's known for his Tin Pan Alley style. Tin Pan Alley was actually a place where there were a bunch of blues clubs, and so there's a lot of blues songs that came out from Tin Pan Alley. So Sunnyland Slim was born in Mississippi. He moved to Chicago after World War II. He's a pianist and a singer, and this is his Tin Pan Alley.
Tell me, Tin Pan Alley, about the roughest place in town. You know, to start the cutting and shooting, soon as the sun go down. Hey, hey, hey. What kind of place can an old alley be? Lord, every woman I get, you know that old alley tricks away from me. When I need my little baby, because she can't be found. wake up early in the morning, child. Ten Pan Alley bound. Hey, 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 hey. What kind of place can that alley be? Lord, as a woman I get, you know the alley take away from me.
So that was probably the most traditional example of blues. So when I think of the blues, the singing and the piano, that and the string bass going on the back, that's kind of like my traditional blues idea. You heard a improvised piano solo there in that example. After he finishes singing the second verse, he improvs all the way through the 12-bar blues. So what happens is when you're improving, you know the key of each measure, so you know what key to play in. So you heard him playing a lot with just the chord structures that he'd been playing the whole time while he was singing. So improv is made up on the spot, but with a structure underneath of it. And that's what helps artists perform those improv solos. So there are different types of blues. Today there are many different shades of blue. Forms include the traditional country blues, which is a general term that describes the rural blues of the Mississippi Delta, the Piedmont, and other rural locales. There's the jump blues, a danceable amalgam of swing and blues, and a precursor to R&B. Jump blues was pioneered by Louis Jordan. There's boogie woogie, a piano-based blues popularized by Meade Lux Lewis, Albert Ammons, and Pete Johnson, and derived from barrel house and ragtime. There's the Chicago blues, which is the Delta blues but electrified. The cool blues, a sophisticated piano-based form that owes much to jazz. West Coast blues was popularized mainly by Texas musicians who moved to California. So West Coast blues is heavily influenced by the swing beat. The Texas blues, Memphis blues, and St. Louis blues consist of a wide variety of subgenres. Louisiana blues is characterized by a swampy guitar or harmonica sound with lots of echo, while Kansas City blues is jazz-oriented. Think Count Basie. There's also the British blues, a rock blues hybrid pioneered by John Mayall, Peter Green, and Eric Clapton. New Orleans blues is largely piano-based, with the exception of some talented guitarists such as Guitar Slim and Snooks Eaglin. And most people are familiar with blues rock. So, the blues is probably the earliest and most bendable, adjustable form of jazz, because basically as long as you're using those the chord progression, you can call your song a blues. Most blues are slower and vocal, but there's a ton of different, like it says, there's a ton of different shades of blues, and blues are attributed in almost every style of jazz that's going to emerge. So I hope you learned a little bit more about the blues today. Maybe heard something that you hadn't heard before. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.